right, that looks good. Ship's veering to port, go 22 knots. Sideswipes the iceberg. Murdoch ports around the iceberg, try to keep from hitting the propellers. That looks pretty good.
For 40 years, millions of eyes have stayed fixed on the haunting footage of Titanic's bow, where the railings still stand upright and the massive anchors rest in place nearly 12,500 feet below the surface. Yet there is a far more disturbing truth that the camera lens often avoids. A few hundred meters beyond the bow, the other half of the ship is not resting in quiet dignity. It has been torn apart, crushed, and twisted beyond recognition.
We got our maximum peak stress, and yeah, boom, brakes. Okay, bow swinging down, that looks good. The double keel hang on, and then they separate. Bow plunges straight down. All right, we got mast snapping back.
Why do we so rarely see the stern? The answer lies not only in the scale of its physical destruction, but in a far more violent mechanism of collapse that remained hidden for more than a century. When Dr. Robert Ballard and his expedition team discovered the wreck of the Titanic in the early hours of September 1st, 1985, the world exhaled in relief. At last, the greatest ocean mystery of the 20th century appeared to be solved. The first images transmitted from the floor of the North Atlantic, about 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, immediately shaped humanity's perception of the disaster. Before the public stood a scene that felt both haunting and solemn: the bow of the Titanic. Its most iconic architectural feature emerged from eternal darkness with astonishing integrity. Despite the violent impact with the seabed after its plunge from the surface, the main structure of the bow remained upright. The cargo crane still reached skyward. The hatch covers rested in place. Most striking of all, the delicate railings continued along the edge of the ship as if untouched by immense water pressure or the erosion of time for 4 decades. Documentary footage has reinforced this image. We see the bow cutting through seabed sediment, much as it once parted the surface waves. We glimpse the bridge where Captain Smith once stood, and the windows that opened into the luxurious first-class quarters. This preservation creates an unsettling comfort. It invites viewers to believe that although the catastrophe claimed more than 1,500 lives, the ship itself rests below as an eternal memorial, a steel colossus sleeping peacefully on the ocean floor. This assumption has embedded itself in popular culture. When we hear the phrase Titanic wreck, our minds immediately summon the bow. It represents dignity, the pinnacle of Edwardian shipbuilding, and a tragic romantic vision of the past. Filmmakers, museum curators, and the public alike have unintentionally helped sustain the image of the sleeping giant. We believe we have seen the whole story, that the wreck lies as a unified structure in calm repose beneath layers of sediment. Yet that serenity is only half the truth. The intense focus on the melancholic beauty of the bow has created a cognitive blind spot. We forget that the Titanic stretched nearly 900 feet in length, and what we admire is only a fragment of that immense architecture. If you examine the visual archives from Titanic expeditions since 1985, a curious pattern begins to emerge. There are thousands of high-resolution images capturing the smallest details of the bow, from Captain Smith's bathtub to champagne bottles still sealed with cork. By contrast, photographs of the stern are suspiciously scarce. Why would one of the most significant maritime sites in history be documented so unevenly? This absence is not the result of technical failure or casual oversight. It echoes a fierce historical dispute that erupted immediately after the night of April 15, 1912. During both British and American inquiries, a profound divide surfaced in survivor testimony. Among the 706 who lived, a significant group insisted that they saw the ship break in two before it sank. They described the roar of tearing metal and the stern rising high before plunging back into the sea. Yet others, including the highest-ranking surviving officer, Charles Lightoller, maintained that Titanic slipped beneath the surface intact, descending as a single mass. At the time, investigators chose to trust the officers and technical experts who argued that Titanic's steel structure was too strong to fracture. For 73 years, the official narrative recorded in history books held that the ship sank whole. Only when Robert Ballard located the wreck did the physical evidence confirm what many witnesses had claimed all along. The vessel had indeed broken apart. Even after this truth was established, global attention did not shift decisively toward the stern. Documentaries often glide past the area. Three-dimensional models meticulously reconstruct the bow while leaving the stern as a vague outline. There is a collective hesitation in confronting the ship's aft section. Oceanographic data show that the stern rests roughly 2,000 feet from the bow. For modern submersibles, that distance is manageable. So what lies there that causes camera lenses to lose their earlier enthusiasm? The silence suggests that what sits south of the debris field is not merely another section of wreckage. It is something that unsettles the aesthetic comfort we have drawn from this tragedy. Leaving the bow behind, remotely operated vehicles begin their journey across a vast, dark expanse known as the debris field. This is the space between the two main sections of the wreck, a barren seafloor scattered with the remnants of a miniature civilization. As the submersible lights sweep across sediment at a depth of about 12,500 feet, the landscape shifts. The order and structure of the bow dissolve into mounting chaos. The first objects that appear are those light enough to be carried by currents. Thousands of tons of coal spilled from fuel bunkers, pairs of leather shoes resting side by side in silent testimony to their lost owners, suitcases forced open, shards of broken china. The closer one moves toward the coordinates of the stern, the denser the wreckage becomes. Hull plates emerge, but they no longer retain the graceful curves seen at the bow. They are twisted, torn, contorted like crumpled paper. Massive steam pipes lie scattered, ripped from their reinforced joints. Ocean explorers describe guiding an ROV through this region as an exercise in tension. Sonar maps grow difficult to interpret because of the uneven terrain formed by piled metal. Unlike the bow, where familiar features such as railings and hatch covers provide orientation, the route toward the stern resembles a labyrinth without markers. Here, the distinction between ship and scrap begins to blur. Enormous metal structures lie in disarray, their original function almost impossible to identify. Seafloor currents grow more unpredictable, swirling around large masses and threatening expensive equipment. As the gap of 2,000 feet narrows, the cameras register larger steel forms, yet their shapes are alien. There are no elegant lines of an ocean liner, no grandeur, only raw destruction. We are approaching an accident scene on an industrial scale where the principles of structural integrity seem to have been overwhelmed by a force of staggering magnitude. When the intense beams of the submersible finally illuminate their target, the truth of Titanic's stern strikes like a visual blow that shatters any expectation of preservation. The stern does not rest on the seabed. It has been obliterated in stark contrast to the proud silhouette of the bow. The stern appears as a colossal mass of mangled steel, a chaotic tangle of metal twisted beyond recognition. The decks that once hosted third-class promenades and elegant smoking rooms have collapsed completely, compressed into one another in a crushing vertical stack. Spaces that were once several feet high are now narrow cavities flattened under immense pressure. The hull, thick steel designed to withstand the fiercest storms, has been peeled away from its frame. In many places, the plates are bent outward, exposing mechanical innards. The two massive steam engines, each towering like a 3-story building, stand amid the ruin as the only structures retaining a semblance of form, protected by their dense and robust construction. Almost everything else has been erased. The stern is driven deep into sediment, embedded in the seabed with terrifying force. Fragments of the superstructure walls, domes, staircases have been hurled outward for dozens of yards, forming a ring of devastation around the central mass. The wing propellers, once symbols of maritime engineering pride, now lie partially buried or warped beneath the ship's own weight. The image is shocking because it strips away all romance. There is no tragic beauty here, only the brutality of physics. It resembles the aftermath of an explosion more than a shipwreck. How can two halves of the same vessel, sinking to the same depth and subjected to the same pressure, meet such radically different fates? The bow stands with surprising composure, while the stern is torn into fragments. This contrast cannot be explained solely by impact with the seabed. A more violent mechanism must have acted before this mass of steel ever touched the cold ocean floor. To understand why the stern was reduced to a mass of distorted wreckage, we must return to the fundamental principles of physics and to the structural design of Titanic itself, factors that became lethal in the ship's final moments. The difference lies in how the two sections descended. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, water flooded the forward compartments. This process unfolded relatively slowly over more than 2 hours. By the time the bow slipped beneath the surface, most of its internal spaces were already filled with water. Pressure inside and outside the hull remained largely equalized. When the bow separated and fell toward the seabed, it behaved much like a submarine that had opened its flood valves. It moved through the water in a streamlined form, minimizing resistance and making contact with the ocean floor in a comparatively controlled impact. Even though it drove deep into the sediment, the stern followed a radically different path. When the ship broke apart at the surface, the aft section remained afloat for several minutes and was still filled with air. It contained vast cargo holds, refrigerated storage spaces, and hundreds of third-class cabins. These were enormous air pockets. When the stern finally began to sink, it did not descend gently. It was pulled downward with terrifying speed. Seawater exerts an additional atmosphere of pressure for every 10 meters of depth. At 100 meters, then 200, then 1,000, the pressure difference between the surrounding ocean and the trapped air within the stern became catastrophic. An implosion occurred. This was not an outward blast that expelled material. It was a violent inward collapse driven by overwhelming external pressure. At a certain depth, the steel hull of the stern could no longer withstand the force of the ocean pressing against its hollow compartments. In an instant, the air inside was compressed. Structural steel tore apart, and water surged inward with the force of countless battering rams. Decks were crushed down onto one another. Bulkheads were ripped free. Compressed air rebounded outward, dragging interior fittings, luggage, and fragments of metal with it, producing the inverted peeling patterns visible on the wreck today. This implosion happened while the stern was still falling through the water column, transforming it into a chaotic mass before it ever reached the seabed. The devastation we observe now is the fossilized imprint of that violent physical event. The very empty spaces that once allowed the ship to float became the agents of its destruction in the deep. If the implosion was the first fatal blow, time and biology are delivering the final stroke. The wreck of Titanic, especially the already shattered stern, is now the site of large-scale biological consumption. In 2010, scientists isolated a new species of bacteria from rust samples collected at the site and named it Halomonas titanicae. This organism is an extremophile, perfectly adapted to darkness, high pressure, and the salinity of the deep sea. Its food source is iron, the skeletal framework of the ship. The orange formations that hang like icicles in many images are not passive corrosion. They are living structures known as rusticles, dynamic microbial communities that consume steel and excrete fine metallic residue. The process is advancing at a measurable rate. Scientific estimates suggest that these bacterial colonies are consuming between 1/10 and nearly 1/4 of a ton of iron from the wreck each day. The stern, already torn open and presenting a far greater metal surface area to seawater due to fractures and collapse, is under especially aggressive attack. Thin steel plates have vanished. Load-bearing structures are weakening. What remains of the stern is gradually folding under its own weight. Even the seemingly intact bow is not immune. Recent expeditions have documented the collapse of once familiar features. Captain Smith's bathtub has disappeared beneath debris. The gymnasium on the starboard side is beginning to fail. The roof of the Marconi wireless room stands in a precarious state. Experts predict that within the next 20 to 50 years, the recognizable structure of Titanic will cease to exist. It will deteriorate into an unformed mass of iron oxide on the seabed. The stern, already fragmented, will be the first to dissolve into the sediment. We are witnessing the slow death of a historic site in real time. There is no means to halt this process. The ocean is reclaiming what belongs to it, atom by atom. Ultimately, the question of why we speak so little about the stern extends beyond technical or aesthetic reasons. It reaches into a deeper psychological response to catastrophe. The bow of Titanic preserved in outline allows us to sustain a romantic narrative. It resembles a stage after the actors have departed, leaving behind a grand yet sorrowful setting. It evokes a gentle sense of mourning, a refined melancholy. We can gaze upon the bow and imagine human ambition, the attempt to master nature, defeated yet dignified. The stern tells a different story. It is the stark embodiment of terror. It was where many passengers gathered as the ship made its final plunge. It was the setting for the last moments of panic, for screams, for death. More importantly, its physical condition, a crumpled heap of metal, stands as undeniable evidence of nature's destructive power over human engineering. When we look at the stern, we do not see romance. We see violence. We see chaos. We see the comprehensive failure of technology under immense physical force. It is an unsettling image that strips away the comfort and control we long to preserve. The absence of the stern from popular imagination functions as a collective defense. We choose to contemplate the more graceful aspect of the wreck to avoid confronting the brutal reality of its end. Yet whether we look or not, the stern remains in eternal darkness, continuing to corrode and fade. Titanic is not the story of a ship that could not sink. It is the story of the fragility of human ambition, and the forgotten stern is its final, most honest, and most painful chapter, one we have yet to find the courage to read aloud.